But something more serious, what is going on with the Albanese government? A couple of things, more things are going wrong, apart from, energy revolution, the voice, blah, blah, blah. Let's start with this one. One of the very first decisions Anthony Albanese made when he became Prime Minister was to let a Sri Lankan family of illegal immigrants stay here, even though they'd lost just about every court case trying to claim they really were refugees when they weren't. It sent a signal. Well, for the first time in 9 years, we've now got a government having to send boat people to Nauru again. Only 11 this time, but it is an unwelcome start. Joining me is the opposition's Home Affairs spokesman, James Paterson. James, thanks for your time. The government kept this secret for a month and now won't tell us anything about these so-called asylum seekers, but only 11 of them. That's not so many. Should we care?
Well, Andrew, we've seen this movie before, haven't we? Labor gets into office. They weaken the strong border protection policies of the Liberal and National parties. The boats start again and human misery results in it. And it's only with the election again of a Liberal and Nationals government that we stop the boats, that we secure the borders, that we close down detention centres, get kids out of detention centres, and even close down some of those regional processing centres. But Labor hasn't learned from their mistakes, and I am deeply worried that we now have the first people transferred to Nauru in 9 years, and the government is not willing to be open and transparent about it at all, because I fear we are headed into those dark times again.
Yes, it's quite. Look, I'm not going to start panicking about 11. They said, the boats were too rickety to turn back, so they brought them in. But I don't know. It all starts with a few and then ends up with who knows how many. James Paterson, another issue. A little bit like that last one that came out of the Senate estimates hearing late yesterday. Solar panels. Now, Australia's got absolutely nuts on them, And the thing is, 99% of them are imported. And they all need smart inverters to convert, the energy into electricity. But of those smart inverters, more than half come from communist China. They're all hooked up into the internet and they could be switched off by China if it's put a bug in there or hacks or, does a hack or something. Liberal Senator Holly Hughes asked the government expert about exactly this yesterday.
Beijing can fundamentally tell these companies to, they can sabotage, they can surveil, or they can disrupt power supplies. So what is being done to ensure that we have sovereignty and our sovereign risk is protected when it comes to our energy markets?
Australia has the largest proportion of rooftop solar anywhere in the developed world, 1 in 3 households in Australia, and it's something that the department has been focusing on, but it does take some time in terms of doing the work to develop and then implement a solution.
James, we've gone from relying on our own coal-fired power stations, using our own coal for electricity, now to using a lot of solar panels, among the other things, that can be switched off by China. It seems to me an idiotic thing to do.
Andrew, energy security is national security, and at the same time that Europe has learned the danger of being dependent on an authoritarian neighbour for their energy source, and they're seeking to reduce it, Australia's going in the opposite direction. We're moving from sovereign-controlled sources of energy to sources of energy where we're dependent on an authoritarian neighbour. It was several months ago that I first revealed that 58% of the smart solar inverters being installed in Australia were made by companies controlled or linked to the Chinese Communist Party, including Huawei. That was on the front page of the Australian newspaper through Cameron Stewart. And then several weeks later, the respected independent Cybersecurity Cooperative Research Centre released a report backing my concerns. It's only now that the government has publicly acknowledged this risk, admitted this risk and said it's a problem. But in the meantime, they've done absolutely nothing at all about it. Every day right now, there are thousands of these inverters being installed on the roofs of family homes, small businesses, schools, community organisations, and every one of those represents a cybersecurity risk to this country, which, if activated, if taken advantage of by a strategic adversary like the Chinese Communist Party, could shut down our grid. Now, we cannot afford to be this vulnerable in such an uncertain strategic environment, but the Albanese government has no plan whatsoever to deal with it.
James, one last thing. I was in Darwin on the weekend for a funeral, which is why I couldn't do the show last night. Apologies to viewers. From my hotel in the city, I could look across the water to the port of Darwin, which dominates the estuary out there. And behind it is the Darwin Industry Zone. And then there's a rail link and go straight to Paterson, which is a big satellite city. There's a gas hub as well. And I couldn't believe we had leased this clearly strategic site to China, right? The Port of Darwin to China. And the Albanese government last Friday, when, everyone closes up shop, that's the time to dump bad news, announced, just before the Prime Minister flies to China as well, oh, well, actually, we changed our mind. There's no security issues with this. It's all fine. And what really underlined it for me, and thanks to my cousin's husband for pointing me out on this one, what I didn't know, and what makes the decision even more bonkers, is that the US military actually has a fuel depot behind the wharf for use in times of war. How can this not be sensitive?
Andrew, you can't understand it, I can't understand it, and when he was in opposition, Anthony Albanese couldn't understand it either. In fact, he described it as a grave mistake, and he promised if Labor was elected that they would deal with it and he would commission a review. Well, finally, they did commission a review. They have not released it. We do not know what it says. And as you say, on a Friday afternoon, after doing his press conference for the day, after the Parliament has risen and just before he flies to the United States, he dropped the decision that the government will not be doing anything about this at all. Now, I really hope, Andrew, that this is not a quid pro quo ahead of his visit to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. I really hope it is not an exchange for the lifting of sanctions on Australian products, because as we know, those were unlawfully applied in the first place. There was no legitimate basis for it, and it was always incumbent of the Chinese government to remove those. For that reason, they would have failed if the challenges in the World Trade Organization were allowed to proceed. So I really hope that this is not a policy concession to China from the Albanese government, because they promised they would not back down when it comes to Australian sovereignty.
Hoping and praying and hoping and praying. I tell you what, Kimberley Kitching, the late Kimberley Kitching, Labor Senator, lovely woman, friend of mine, said to her, the last conversation I had, Labor's going to go soft on China. She said, of course. And I think this might be part of it. Thank you so much for your time, James Paterson.